And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Life from the Inside Out with Kris. We're working on episode 85, and for some of you who've been with us for quite some time with all of these, I'm glad that you're back. If you're just joining us, we've been doing these episodes of all kinds of channeled wisdom from Kris. Lately, in the last one, we've been dissecting some of the powers of perception as well as the role of awareness and where we put our awareness and how that helps to shape our reality. So we're getting into some really fascinating stuff. And Serge is with us. So welcome, Serge. How are you doing
Hey
today?
Dan, I'm doing okay. It's a nice little bit of snow this morning and not too cold yet, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah, it's getting into the winter time, huh?
Yes, toques and parkas.
There you go. All right.
Mm. I think Chris has something interesting up his non-physical sleeves.
All right. Well, I can't wait, and yeah, we'll see how it weaves together.
Now we trust that you are comfortable.
Well, yes, Kris, very comfortable.
Indeed, then we thank you for your consideration.
Oh, thank you as well.
And to paraphrase the seven little dwarves, a weaving we shall go.
We're off to a great start.
Indeed. And perhaps we would like to bring to the table the idea of multi-personhood, the multi-dimensional personality. Uncle Seth has spoken quite mm, deeply about the subject matter, but it is not something that is easily understood, especially when the tendency is to want to compartmentalize this kind of information or knowledge into terms that already fit the definitions that you have of personhood. And for all intents and purposes, the idea of personhood has been whittled down to quite some degree over the last few thousand years, to the point where if other aspects of the personality, and we're not talking about any kind of clinical, pathological personality disorders here, but the very subject of personality or personhood can sometimes be a little troubling simply because it is so poorly understood. You have an idea of what a multidimensional person or individual may or may not be, and we are one of those. Uncle Seth is one of those, and many of the teachers. And this has been represented throughout the annals of your human history and mythologies in very clear and specific ways. In almost all the mythologies of gods and goddesses, they have a rather free expression of many of their quote unquote moods and personal aspects or personality aspects. For instance, if we were to examine the ancient Vedic cultures and myths, take the god Shiva, for instance. Shiva is acknowledged to have at least 54 or more personality or moods, depending upon context. He is sometimes referred to as the destroyer of the universe when he gets really ticked. He has other aspects also as creator, progenitor, and so on and so forth. Quite a variety of them. And if you go up the we'll just loosely utilize the word hierarchy. You have the head god, the one referred to as Krishna. Krishna has his own persona. But then it breaks down into Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and several other forms of Vishnus. All these gods and goddesses have various forms to display personality traits and characteristics. The human being is a multidimensional being, and these are all archetypal descriptions of many of the personality traits and characteristics or moods that are presented in that context of gods and goddesses. The notion of multi-personhood began to be whittled away just a few thousand years ago when the fascination of monotheism started to make its appearance in your cultures and societies. And as that took hold as an experimentation, and that's what it was, an experiment to see how you can combine all of that, the multi-personhood, multidimensional personality structure, into one particular vessel. When that began to take root, then things changed for the human being. Because at the same time, you are still rooted deeply into your own multidimensionality. But over time, you have been encouraged to forego that and only concentrate on one mind, one person, one individual, even though you are composed of multiple aspects. And many years back, we gave an extended seminar on aspect therapy and how to recognize and utilize this particular potential in the human being. So eventually, with this particular discussion, we would like to offer 5 particular steps that can help you get in touch with some aspects of your multiple personhood, your multidimensionality. But for the moment, if you examine what has transpired in the evolution of the human personality over time, it is actually quite fascinating how you have orchestrated and trying to organize and compartmentalize such things as your logical, rational, intellectual mind, and then you set aside another portion that you call your intuitive feeling and emotional selves, your psychological self, separating the two as if the twain shall never meet because they are incompatible, without realizing that they are actually interlaced in a very beautiful relationship. And because you are initially and at your core a multidimensional being, and you have restricted your abilities consciously to display or exhibit that multidimensional personality, you can find not just traces, but some quite vivid displays of that in your own dream experiences. How you dream is a perfect example. But as you return to conscious awareness from dream time experiences, you literally lop off or you whittle away many of the deeper teachings and awarenesses that are displayed in dreamtime experiences. And in order to function in a world where only certain traits are allowed and some are not, then you must leave behind a great amount of experiences. Recently, we offered an 8-week presentation on what we referred to as oddments, oddments of consciousness, of course. This refers to the intuitive side of your nature, but bringing it into balance with your conscious, logical, rational mind. And we would like briefly to speak a little bit about that subject matter, of course, simply because they support each other. In fact, you cannot have one without the other. If you suppress your emotional, intuitive, feeling nature, you eventually end up harming your intellectual, rational, logical side because they are codependent. And the same thing happens in reverse if you squash or deny your intellectual, logical, rational side of the personality. Your own intuitions become imbalanced. And we recognize that perhaps for some time in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even into the 90s, it was quite popular to actually denigrate your intellect and favor the intuitive side. And now, slowly, this is being reintegrated. And part of that also has to do with the way you look at your own archetypes. Now, we mentioned mythological beings, gods and goddesses. They too are archetypal. In the 80s, 90s, and now into this particular decade, you have another kind of phenomenon that presents itself as communication with extraterrestrial beings, other dimensional beings, which are also archetypal and represent a significant sense of connection. Even if you think that they are otherworldly and perhaps even other dimensional beings, they still represent aspects and are therefore archetypal. They represent certain portions, if you like, or deep psychological moods that are not necessarily allowed much representation in your waking hours in the normal sense of the way. So you need those particular connections. You will always have them. You have always had them. Ancient shamanic practices have allowed that. It was understood that the gods or the divine beings were always able to communicate with human beings. Whether it was in Aboriginal cultures or sophisticated, we should rephrase that, or other kinds of civilizations, such as the ancient Greeks that could communicate with the gods and so on and so forth, or the Egyptians or the Romans, it doesn't matter. Always there have been different presentations of communication with these higher aspects of the personality, these other dimensional presentations. And some time back, we started using the terminology that you are civilizations of selves for that very, very purpose. To communicate to you, human beings, whoever reads or listens, that you're not just one finite person. You are an infinite arrangement of personality structures, but your particular cultural backgrounds and so on and so forth more or less insist on one personhood, just one, nothing else. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say that's the norm.
Yes, and it does serve its purpose for whatever reason. But there are other connections that you have with the world and with the universe. For instance, for some time, even though church teachings demonized such individuals, you had what was called witches that had an affinity with nature. Whether you refer to them as nature spirits or nature beings, they had developed an affinity to listen to the whispers of nature. So we would refer that as whispers of witches, wherein individuals were attuned to the subtle movements of nature and energy, the communications that nature presents. And now, scientifically, there is, we shall say, evidence that, for instance, trees in a forest can communicate with each other. They send signals through the mycelia, the very fine network of underground fungi that can communicate to an entire forest, say that there's a fire coming or there's danger coming or something or other, or perhaps a drought. Plants emit particular signals that can be measured when there is, say, an attack by insects or animals that want to eat them, and so on and so forth. So they do communicate information to each other. Certain individuals, such as what you referred to in the passage, which is were also able to detect these subtle whispers of nature. And because of that, they were punished because they understood that nature was a natural expression. But the church wanted that all of these things be eliminated and you come to church and so on and so forth. And the rest is written in the history books. But suffice to say that these individuals were also aware of a kind of multi-personhood, that they were part of nature. And most Aboriginal cultures also saw themselves as part of nature and not the conquerors and destroyers of nature, but a part of nature itself. So they also had an affinity to listen to the whispers of nature. And this allowed them a greater psychological leeway, greater psychological flexibility, which in some cases nowadays is very difficult to achieve simply because your civilization, as you know, it has moved away from that. Though there is an attempt to return to those kinds of roots, but it needs more study. So we are hoping that with the five-step process we will offer, you might have an opportunity to delve into that subject matter for yourselves. Do you have an inquiry, perhaps, or observation?
No, nothing specific. I found all that really fascinating.
Human nature is more fascinating than you will ever be able to understand because it is always evolving. It is not static. The difficulty, the stresses themselves are because you have a static image of yourselves as moving beings, as energy itself, and energy cannot ever be static. So you create your own dichotomies, your own dilemmas, your own challenges, simply because of a certain kind of ignorance about your nature. Were you able to tap into that greater nature, most of your ills would most likely disappear. Most of your fears would also disappear. So, what is the time now?
Well, we could leave the 5 steps to the next episode, and
Yes, that is the intention.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good intro. And if you're still with us in the episode, you're gonna have to hold on to the next one because sounds like we got some juicy stuff coming.
Indeed, we have whispers of wisdom to share.
All right, I like it. So maybe we'll take a little break and we'll end it there, and we'll see the viewers in the next one.
Indeed. We thank you for your consideration.
Oh, thank you, Kris.